Ezra Bridger is about to become the most important character in what comes next on Ahsoka. He spent a decade as the missing Jedi, the one being searched for while the galaxy moved on without him. What no one accounted for is what he became during the years no one could find him. And what he is capable of goes further than anyone who knew him before his disappearance ever saw. When he finally resurfaced on the planet Peridea, he looked more like a survivor than a weapon. He had spent roughly a decade in exile in a distant galaxy, living among a species called Anoti, small, peaceful creatures who took him in when no one else could reach him. He carried no lightsaber and fought with a staff when the situation called for it. He was calm and patient in a way the impulsive teenager from years earlier never managed. Ezra and Grand Admiral Thrawn both made it back to the main galaxy when the search ended, and with Ezra home after 10 years, the search that Ahsoka and Sabine carried for so long felt like it had finally reached its end. Ahsoka and Sabine are stranded on Peridea now, trapped in another galaxy alongside Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati, two Force-sensitive adversaries pursuing their own agendas. Ezra is home, but without Ahsoka at his side, he has to face Thrawn and what remains of the Imperial war machine alone. He's not coming back to follow someone else's lead. The conflict ahead is split between two galaxies, and Ezra is the only one on his side of the divide who has confronted Thrawn and come away with a victory. Hera Syndulla and Zeb Orrelios are back, and for the first time in years, the surviving crew of the rebel ship, the Ghost, will be on the same side of the galaxy. However, Ezra brings more to the fight ahead than a similar face in the same room. Over his years as a Jedi, Ezra reached places in the Force that most knights never come near, and people who noticed him had no reason to pay attention to anyone ordinary. Ezra built every one of those abilities during his training years ago, and none of them have been tested at a galactic scale. Ezra was 14 years old and living alone on the streets of Lothal when he first crossed paths with Kanan Jarrus and the crew of the Ghost. He had never trained and knew nothing about the Jedi, a resourceful kid with sharp instincts and no reason to think he was anything more. Before anyone told him he was Force sensitive, he could already sense Kanan's presence from a distance and located a hidden Jedi holocron aboard the Ghost without being told it existed, reaching for a concealed compartment as though he already knew what was inside. Ezra showed his connection to the Force in smaller ways too. His reflexes were faster than they should have been, and he could sense events a split second before they happened, a trait that kept him alive on Lothal streets for 7 years after the Empire took his parents. Ephraim and Ezra Bridger had broadcast messages speaking out against the regime, and the Empire imprisoned them for it, leaving their 7-year-old son to fend for himself on a planet that did not care whether he survived. Animals gravitated towards Ezra without clear reason during those years, a pattern no one paid much attention to at the time. Kanan Jarrus took Ezra on as his Padawan. Kanan had been a teenage apprentice when Order 66, the Emperor's command to exterminate the Jedi, killed his master and ended his training overnight. He spent over a decade hiding his connection to the Force, and only started using his lightsaber again after forming a rebel cell with Hera Syndulla. He was teaching Ezra skills he had never fully learned, barely older than Ezra when his own training was cut short. Before Kanan could teach him much, Ezra faced his first real trial inside the Lothal Jedi Temple. Kanan sent him in alone, and inside the temple, Ezra confronted visions designed to test his resolve, found his Kyber crystal, and made contact with Yoda. Yoda was in hiding on Dagobah at the time, unreachable to nearly every surviving Jedi, and Ezra was one of the only Force users in that era to speak with the exile Grand Master. Ezra grew at a pace that outran Kanan. Skills that Jedi younglings raised in the temple took years to absorb. Ezra picked up in months. He also studied holographic recordings of Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber lessons stored in Kanan's Jedi holocron, learning the acrobatic Form 4 combat style from a Jedi who would later become Darth Vader, though Ezra did not know that at the time. Midway through Ezra's apprenticeship, Kanan faced a trial of his own inside the same temple. During a Force vision guided by Yoda, a temple guard tested Kanan in combat and, after a pass, performed a knighting ceremony recognizing Kanan as a full Jedi Knight. The guard then revealed his face as the Grand Inquisitor before his fall to the dark side. Kanan trained Ezra for roughly 2 years before earning that rank, which means Ezra spent the first half of his apprenticeship learning from someone who held no formal title at all. The full span of Ezra's training, from his first day with Kanan to his disappearance alongside Thrawn, covered approximately 4 years. In that window, he went from a kid who did not know what the Force was to someone who could hold his ground against Inquisitors and connect with creatures across species lines. Along the way, he touched dark side abilities that most trained Jedi never went near. Most Jedi trained from early childhood through their late teens before facing the trials, and Ezra covered comparable ground in a fraction of that time. On the ancient Sith world of Malachor, Ezra walked into a temple built to destroy the Jedi, and he was the one who figured out how to open it. The temple responded only to a Force user, and Ezra, guided partly by a former Sith named Maul, solved the puzzle that unlocked its core. The former Sith Lord had been living in exile for years, stripped of his apprenticeship, running on hatred and the need for a new partner. When he saw what Ezra could do inside that temple, he decided that Ezra would be his next apprentice. Maul turned on Kanan and Ahsoka to isolate the boy, slashing Kanan across the eyes with a lightsaber and blinding him in the process. Maul did not lose interest after Malachor. He tracked Ezra down and forced a confrontation where the two of them combined a Jedi holocron and a Sith holocron at the same time. The combined holocrons poured light and dark side knowledge into both of them at once and produced fragmented visions neither could fully interpret. Maul was not treating Ezra as a student to Maul. He treated him as a partner whose strength in the Force could match his own on the opposite side. He later kidnapped the rest of the Ghost crew and used them as leverage to pull Ezra back towards him. Darth Vader arrived during the same crisis and registered what Ezra had accomplished inside the temple, placing a Padawan with 2 years of training in the direct attention of one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. However, the most dangerous thing that Ezra brought home from Malachor was a Sith holocron, and he began absorbing its teachings in secret. During a rescue mission shortly after, Ezra seized control of an Imperial Walker pilot's mind, forcing the man to fire on his own soldiers and then walk the vehicle off the edge of a platform to his death. When a fellow rebel asked who taught him that, Ezra answered coldly that Kanan had nothing to do with it. A Jedi mind trick plants a suggestion and relies on the target going along with it. Ezra took the pilot's will away and replaced it with his own, a dark side technique in the same tier as abilities attributed to the Emperor. He performed it after only a short period of studying the holocron, with no visible strain, and walked away from it without falling to the dark side. By the final stretch of the war on Lothal, the Emperor took personal interest. Palpatine did not send an Inquisitor or a proxy. He reached out, appearing to Ezra through the Force in the guise of a kind old man, offering a vision of his dead parents through a portal and using the one thing he knew Ezra could not turn away from. Palpatine did not stop at direct encounters. In a separate exchange, the Emperor told Thrawn that he intended to test the Grand Admiral's loyalty regarding Ezra, folding a teenage Padawan into the political calculations at the Empire's highest level. Palpatine wanted Ezra because of a gateway that Ezra could reach and the Emperor could not. Ezra ended a war not with his dark side abilities, but with a completely different part of the Force. From before his first day of training, Ezra had a bond with living creatures that no teacher gave him and no holocron could explain. Animals on Lothal gravitated towards him without any clear cause, and Ezra learned to direct that instinct with more control as his training progressed. On Lothal, Ezra and Kanan encountered a pack of Furnox, aggressive predators nesting in the ruins outside the capital. Ezra calmed the pack and brought them under his protection. Later in the same encounter, under pressure and reaching for the dark side, he called a single enormous Furnox to his side and sent it against the Grand Inquisitor and his soldiers. Even when Ezra reached for the dark side during that encounter, he reached through a creature rather than through a telekinetic attack. The Purrgil would turn out to be the most important creatures Ezra ever connected with. Enormous whale-like beings that could cross hyperspace without a ship. The Purrgil first crossed paths with Ezra during a mission near an asteroid gas refinery. Ezra found the Purrgil through the Force and understood them when no one else in the crew could, and the bond he formed during that encounter came back years later when Lothal needed it most. During the final battle for Lothal, with Thrawn's fleet bombarding the planet from orbit, Ezra called a full pod of Purrgil to the fight. The creatures tore through the Imperial blockade and descended on the Chimera. Their tentacles punched through the hull and wrapped around the Star Destroyer's superstructure while Thrawn's soldiers fired at them and could not bring them down. Ezra stood on the bridge of the Chimera as the ship lurched beneath him, facing Thrawn in those final seconds without moving. The Purrgil dragged the Chimera into hyperspace with Ezra and Thrawn still aboard, pulling both of them out of the galaxy. No known Jedi has directed living creatures at that scale and produced a comparable outcome. The Lothals followed the same pattern. Native to Lothal and deeply tied to the Force, the Wolves chose Ezra over every other person around him. They carried him across the planet and guided him to places where the Force ran strong, treating him as an ally in a way they offered no one else. The Wolves could cross vast distances in an instant, carrying Ezra through passages that bent the rules of normal travel. They were tied to the Lothal Jedi Temple and to whatever lay beneath it, a deeper layer of the Force that Ezra would soon encounter on his own terms. The Lothal Jedi Temple held a gateway that Palpatine spent years trying to reach, and a Padawan walked through it before the Emperor ever could. Beneath the temple, a mural depicted three ancient Force entities known as the Mortis gods: the father, who represented balance, the daughter, who embodied the light, and the son, who embodied the dark. When Ezra touched the mural, it responded to his connection to the Force and opened a doorway into a dimension called the World Between Worlds. The World Between Worlds exists outside normal space and time, a network of pathways and portals connecting every era and every corner of the galaxy. Inside, voices echoed from Jedi and Force users across different ages, past and future blending into a single corridor of sound. Ezra heard fragments of conversations spanning centuries of Force history. Among the openings lining the pathways, one showed a moment he recognized: Ahsoka Tano locked in her duel with Darth Vader on Malachor, the fight she'd walked into years earlier and never returned from. Ezra reached through the portal and drew Ahsoka out of the fight, guided by the Morai, a small convor owl tied to the daughter of Mortis. He brought her across the boundary of time and into the World Between Worlds, saving her from a duel she was seconds from losing to Darth Vader. Palpatine had been trying to enter the World Between Worlds through Sith sorcery, performing rituals and pouring dark side fire towards the threshold. He could not get in. Ezra walked through on the living Force, and the instinct that had drawn every creature in his life towards him since childhood may well be the same connection that opened a door Palpatine's sorcery could not. When the Emperor attacked through one of the openings, sending streams of blue flames across the boundary, Ahsoka raised a Force barrier to hold it back. Ezra joined her and added his strength to the wall, and together they drove the fire back. A tendril of flame coiled around Ezra and began dragging him through the threshold, but Ahsoka cut through it with her lightsaber and freed him. Both fled through separate doorways, Ahsoka returning to Malachor and Ezra back to Lothal, and the rebels destroyed the temple entrance behind them to lock the Emperor out for good. Only two living beings have ever entered the World Between Worlds: Ezra Bridger and Ahsoka Tano. The Mortis gods held the key to that doorway, and the last time anyone saw Baylan Skoll, he was standing on a giant statue of the Father on Peridea, staring into the distance after a journey that led him to the same ancient mythology. Baylan's position on the Father's statue and the direction of his search both point towards the same kind of power, and Ezra has already been inside. At roughly 19 years old, Ezra Bridger vanished into hyperspace aboard the Chimera, wrapped in the tentacles of the Purrgil alongside Grand Admiral Thrawn. Approximately a decade later, he resurfaced on Peridea. He was living among the Noti, a species of small, gentle creatures who had welcomed him into their community. When Ezra fought alongside Sabine against Thrawn's forces, he held his own against armed soldiers with hand-to-hand combat and a wooden staff. He moved differently than he had in his youth, controlled and economical, picking his moments rather than throwing his body at every opening. What happened during those 10 years remains blank. Ezra may have trained alone, spent time as Thrawn's captive, or had no contact with Thrawn at all after arriving in the other galaxy. He ended up separated from the Chimera and living among the Noti, but the specifics of his decade in the other galaxy have not come to light. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Ahsoka Tano all spent years in isolation. Every one of them came out of exile stronger than they went in, pushed inward towards part of the Force that combat and active missions never reached. Whether Ezra followed the same trajectory has not been confirmed. Ezra survived a decade in an alien galaxy when Huyang, the ancient droid who had served generations of Jedi, offered Ezra a lightsaber kept as a spare from Kanan's days as a Padawan. Ezra accepted without hesitation. He could fight with a blade again, but he had fought his way through a decade without one. Thrawn lost the war on Lothal because of a connection he could not predict and could not counter. Ezra did not beat him through fleet strength or any flaw in Thrawn's planning. If Thrawn is the primary antagonist going forward, Ezra has spent the last decade on Peridea living inside the one advantage Thrawn had no answer for. He lived among creatures who responded to him the way every species in his life always has. The galaxy Ezra is walking back into is not the one he left. The New Republic is young, its military spread thin across a galaxy that spent decades under centralized control and still has not fully accepted the new government. Thrawn pinned Lothal under orbital bombardment and held a naval blockade that conventional rebel tactics could not break, and a young, unstable New Republic is the kind of target he thrives against. The only person who stopped him is a Jedi who spent the last 10 years in another galaxy. On the other side of the galactic divide, Ahsoka Tano and Sabine Wren are stranded on Peridea alongside Baylan Skoll. Baylan was last seen standing on a statue of the Father, one of the Mortis gods, with the bearing of someone who had found what he was looking for. The Mortis mythology is the same mythology that governed the doorway Ezra walked through on Lothal, the entrance to the world between worlds. Ahsoka is physically close to the source of that mythology now, but Ezra is the one who has already been inside the dimension it leads to. The surviving crew of the Ghost is reassembling around Ezra in the main galaxy. Hera Syndulla spent years building rank within the New Republic's command structure. Zeb Orrelios brings combat experience and a history of fighting alongside Ezra under fire. Together, they're the only team that has fought Thrawn as a unit and won. Their reunion puts the same team that beat Thrawn on Lothal back on the same side, with Ezra at the center. Ezra Bridger walked out of one galaxy and into the center of every unresolved conflict in the other. The galaxy needs what he became during the years no one could find him. The Imperial war machine that Ezra is walking back into left deep scars across more than one civilization. The complete history of the Mandalorians covers every chapter, from their ancient wars with the Jedi to the slow reclamation of Mandalore under Bo-Katan Kryze. Separately, Hera Syndulla comes from a species whose reputation as the most captivating in the galaxy goes far past first impressions. With roots in the physiology of their Leku, their cultural influence across the Republic, and their place in galactic society.